Good Vach, Shavua Tov, Good Chodesh, Chodesh Tov. We're coming out of Shabbos, but we're still in Rosh Chodesh. It's a 2-day Rosh Chodesh celebrating the beginning of the new month of Tammuz. Let's light up the darkness with some beautiful Torah learning. So late on a Saturday night, as always, Motzi Shabbos. My heroes, my East Coast heroes that you're tuning in at 12:37 a.m. Wow. Guy in Ohio, Joe in the Inland Empire, Sharon in New Jersey, Melissa in Great Neck, New York, Ryan in Jacksonville, Florida, Capiz in the Philippines, Aoife in Florida, Chaim in Florida, Ella's in the house. Ella always says shalom, but where are you tuning in from? Ella, let me know. As well as Karen in Northern California. Welcome, everybody. I'll keep it efficient, so don't waste any of your time so late on a Saturday night. Our daf tonight is Yud Aleph, page 11 here in Tractate Bava Basra, 23rd volume of the Talmud. Tonight, completing our discussion, God willing, of Mishna number 4 here in chapter 1 and opening Mishna number 5. We pick this up right near the top of page 11a. It is taught in a Baraisa. The following was said about Benjamin the righteous, who was appointed supervisor over the charity fund. Once a woman came before him during years of drought and said to him, "My master, sustain me." He said to her, "I swear by the temple service that there was nothing left in the charity fund." It was a drought, it was a famine. So many people were starving. They had all come for charity, and there was nothing left. She said to him, "My master, if you do not sustain me, a woman and her 7 sons will die." He, Benjamin the righteous, arose and sustained her with his own funds. In other words, he impoverished himself to sustain this woman who was a stranger to him. After some time, he fell deathly ill. The ministering angels in heaven said to the Holy One, blessed be he, Master of the universe, you said that anyone who saves a single life in Israel is regarded as if he had saved the entire world. Right? We learned that in Tractate Sanhedrin. Should then Benjamin the righteous, who saved a woman and her 7 sons, die after these few years, meaning while still in his youth? And they immediately tore up his sentence in the heavenly tribunal. And a sage taught they added 22 years to his life. Right? What could be a clear illustration of the point that the Gemara has been making now for a couple of pages, that great is charity, the mitzvah of charity, perhaps as great as all other mitzvahs. Incredible rewards flow to those who meticulously, religiously, regularly, constantly give to charity. It even saves life. It certainly saves your life in the next world, because the money that you give away in this world, that's what you can take with you. And it may even extend your life in this world. The sages taught there was an incident involving King Munbaz, who liberally gave away his treasures and the treasures of his ancestors in the years of drought, distributing the money to the poor. So his brothers and his father's household joined together against him to protest against his actions. And they said to him, "Your ancestors stored up money in their treasuries and added to the treasuries of their ancestors, and you are liberally distributing it all to the poor." King Munbaz said to them, "Not so. My ancestors stored up below, whereas I am storing above. As it is stated, truth will spring out of the earth and righteousness will look down from heaven." Psalm 85:12. Meaning that the righteous deeds that one has performed are stored up in heaven. The deeds that you do, the charity that you give away, this is the greatest investment in the history of investment. Because it doesn't just keep paying here during your mortal life or perhaps the lives of your descendants, maybe if the bank doesn't fail, etc. But every dollar you give away to charity is stored up to pay an eternal dividend in the world to come. Says King Moonbuzz, I am storing up above. As it is stated, truth will spring out of the earth and righteousness will look down from heaven. My ancestors stored up treasures in a place where the human hand can reach. And so their treasures could have been robbed. Whereas I am storing up treasures in a place where the human hand cannot reach. And so they are secure. The ultimate secure and safe bank is the bank of heaven, where you store all the money you've given away. As it is stated, righteousness and justice are the foundation of your thrones. Referring to the Holy One, blessed be He. Continues King Moonbaz, my ancestors stored up something that does not generate profit. As money sitting in a treasury does not increase. Whereas I am storing up something that generates profit. As it is stated, say of the righteous that it shall be well with them, for they shall eat the fruit of their doings. My ancestors stored up treasures of money, whereas I am storing up treasures of souls. As it is stated, the fruit of the righteous is a tree of life, the fruit of the righteous is a tree of life, and he that wins souls is wise. My ancestors stored up for others, for their sons and heirs, when they themselves would pass from this world, whereas I am storing up for myself, as it is stated, and it shall be righteousness to you. My ancestors stored up for this world, whereas I am storing up for the world to come, as it is stated, and your righteousness shall go before you, the glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. Now, I can imagine his sons and grandsons and relatives watching him give away his fortune to charity would say, well, yeah, that argument, if you want to give away your fortune, I mean, you could do that, but don't try to win us over to your point of view that you're doing the right thing by saying that my ancestors stored up for their descendants, I am storing up for myself, meaning that he's giving it all away so that he will have a good place in the world to come. But what's he doing for his descendants? That would be their counter argument to that, right? He's giving away what would have been their inheritance. But isn't he also blessing his children and grandchildren? First of all, that they need to be self-made. People are going to have to earn their own fortunes and not just rely on what they inherited. And that probably will improve their character tremendously. But also, your descendants do benefit from being the descendants of a righteous person. And the lessons that you teach, such as to say the natural consequence, plus also I think blessings do come from heaven, not only for you, but for your descendants. So it's not that he's stripping their cupboard bare, as it were, by giving away all this money. That also will accrue to the merit and blessing, I think, of his descendants. That's my opinion. Now, the Gemara resumes its analysis of the Mishna, which taught that one must reside in a place for 12 months in order to be considered a resident for the purposes of issues such as paying taxes. But if he bought himself a residence in the city, he's immediately considered like one of the people of the city. And the Gemara comments that the Mishnah, this was Mishnah number 4, is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, as it is taught in a Baraisa that Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, if he bought any amount of land in the city and not necessarily a residence, he is immediately considered like one of the people of the city. Once you own land in the city, you pay taxes like the residents of the city for purposes of communal projects like security and drinking water, etc., even if the land that you bought isn't a residence. The Gemara asks, but isn't it taught otherwise? In a different Baraisa, the Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, if one bought land that is suitable for a residence, he's immediately considered like one of the people of the city, even if there's not a residence on it, but it's land where a residence would be built. And this contradicts the first Baraisa that any land would trigger paying those taxes. And the Gemara answers, this is a dispute between two Tanaim, and they disagree with regard to the opinion of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. Meaning they disagree, what did Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel say? And so they brought down two different versions of it. Excuse me, it's quite hot in my office. Okay, Mishnah number 5 here in chapter 1 of Tractate Bava Basra. Mishnah 5. The court does not divide a courtyard at the request of one of the joint owners of the courtyard unless there will be in it 4x4 cubits for this one and 4x4 cubits for that one, i.e. the minimum area for each of the joint owners, right? So if the two people want to split their courtyard, it doesn't matter what the size is. But if only one of them wants to split and the other one doesn't want to split, the court will step in and force the split, so long as after the courtyard has been split, there's a minimum area on the two sides of the wall. What's that minimum area? 4x4 cubits. And the court does not divide a jointly owned field unless there is a space in it to plant 9 kav of seed for this one and 9 kav of seed for that one. Same idea, minimum size. Rabbi Yehuda says the court does not divide a field unless there is a space in it to plant 9 half kav of seed for this one and 9 half kav of seed for that one. And the court does not divide a jointly owned garden unless there is a space in it to plant a half kav of seed for this one and a half kav of seed for that one. And Rabbi Kiva says that half of that amount is sufficient, i.e. the area required for sowing a quarter kav of seed, known as a base rova. This would be the minimum size of a garden that you would split it into two, and the owners would get those resulting small gardens rather than jointly owning or jointly controlling the common garden. Right? You don't put up a wall and split it unless what's going to result has these minimum measurements. Similarly, the court does not divide a hall, known as a heteroclin, a drawing room, a dovecote, a cloak, a bathhouse, an olive press, and an irrigated field unless there is enough for this one to use the property in the usual manner and enough for the other one to use the property in the usual manner. And this is the principle: anything for which, when it is divided, each of the parts is large enough to retain the name of the original item, the court will divide it, right? Because it's got co-owners and one of them wants to divide it, the other one doesn't. The court will step in and create the division as long as, having split it in two, the two halves would still retain the name of the previous thing, right? If it could still be called a field, if it could still be called a cloak, if it could still be called a dovecote, if it could still be called an irrigated field. When does this apply? It applies when the joint owners do not both wish to divide the item. When only one of the owners wishes to divide the property, he cannot force the other to do so unless there's this minimum size. However, when both of them wish to divide the item, then they may divide it, even if each of the owners will receive less than the amounts specified above. But in the case of sacred writings, i.e. a scroll of any of the 24 books of the Bible, right? I mean, we're just so accustomed that a Bible looks like this, right? A Tanakh. But in ancient times, you know, what was to have this, right? A complete Bible, Torah, prophets, and writings, you would have 24 scrolls that look like a Sefer Torah. To have a Bible, you would have 24 scrolls. Now, if people jointly owned any one of those 24 scrolls, they are not permitted to divide it, even if both are willing, because you don't cut a scroll, you don't cut a book in half, especially a sacred book. But in the case of sacred writings, i.e. any scroll of the 24 books of the Bible that were inherited by two people, they may not divide them, even if both of them wish to do so, because it would be a show of disrespect to cut the scroll in half. That's Mishnah number 5. Now the Gemara. Rabbi Asi says, that Rabbi Yochanan says, the 4 cubits of the courtyard, which they said that each of the joint owners must receive, is in addition to the space in front of the entrances to each of the houses that is assigned to the owner of the house for loading and unloading. Okay, so there's a little illustration here, if you could see that. And basically the idea is there are 2 houses that open up onto a courtyard, and they have a doorway. So when they divide the courtyard, what they don't take into account for the division is the space immediately in front of the door. If you can see, that's probably a little bit out of focus. But the idea is you have I don't know, what do you kind of call it, a portico, an entranceway. I mean, just a little bit of space right in front of your door, and that's considered part of your house, not part of the courtyard. So each guy gets a bit of a space in front of his door where he could bring an animal, unload it, receive packages, etc. That was already his, right? And so in other words, to divide the courtyard, there has to be 4 by 4 cubits left for each of the two parties after they divide it, not counting these areas in front of their entrance. That opinion is also taught in a Baraisa. The court does not divide a courtyard unless its area is sufficient so that there will be in it 8 cubits for this one and 8 cubits for that one. And the Gemara asks, but didn't we just learn in the Mishnah that it suffices for there to be 4 cubits, meaning 4 square cubits, or 4 by 4 cubits, that's what they mean right here. 4 by 4 cubits for this one and 4 by 4 cubits for that one. So rather, conclude from it that the Baraisa was taught in accordance to the opinion of Rabbi Asi. And the Gemara affirms, conclude from it that this is so, meaning your side of the courtyard has to be at least 4 by 4 cubits in addition to the 4 by 4 cubits in front of your doorway. And there are those who raise the Baraisa as a contradiction to what is taught in the Mishnah and use the previously mentioned point to reconcile the two texts. Meaning, we learned in the Mishnah, the court does not divide a courtyard at the request of one of the joint owners unless there will be in it 4 by 4 cubits for this owner and 4 by 4 cubits for that one. But isn't it taught in the Baraisa that the court does not divide a courtyard unless there are 8 cubits for this one and 8 cubits for that one? So about this, Rabbi Asi said that Rabbi Yochanan said, the 4 cubits of the courtyard, which they said each of the joint owners must receive, is in addition to the space in front of the entrances to each of their houses. Further, with regard to the division of a courtyard, Rav Huna says a courtyard is divided according to its entrances. Each of the owners receives a share of the courtyard in proportion to the number of entrances that his house has opening into the courtyard. And Rav Chisda says 4 cubits are allotted to each of the owners for each and every entrance, and the rest of the courtyard is then divided equally between them. So that's 2 different views, right? One idea was if one guy has 2 entrances into the courtyard from his house, and the other guy only has 1 entrance, so one opinion would be that the guy with 2 entrances is going to end up with 2/3 of the courtyard, and the other guy's going to end up with 1/3 when they divide it. That's one opinion. And the other opinion is, no, each guy, depending on how many, each of your entrances into the courtyard gets its own 4 by 4 cubits. So the guy with 2 entrances will get a little bit more of the courtyard, but beyond those, spaces just in front of the door, beyond that, whatever's left of the courtyard gets divided equally. Now the Gemara comments, it is taught in a Baraisa in accordance with the opinion of Rav Chisda. Each of the entrances opening to a courtyard is allotted 4 cubits. So if this one has 1 entrance and that one has 2 entrances, the one who has 1 entrance takes 4 cubits, and the one who has 2 entrances takes 8 cubits, and they divide the rest of the courtyard equally between them, right? That was the second opinion. So if this one had an entrance 8 cubits wide, he takes 8 cubits adjacent to the entrance and 4 cubits in the courtyard. Gemara expresses surprise. What are these 4 cubits in the courtyard doing here? Doesn't it all depend on the size of the courtyard? And Abaye said, this is what the Baraisa is saying. For the entrance, he takes 8 cubits along the length of the courtyard and 4 cubits along the width of the courtyard. In other words, he takes a strip 4 cubits wide along the length of his entrance, right? This strip that he has, this space right in front of the doorway, it extends 4 cubits away from the door and is as wide as the door. So it's at least 4 cubits wide, but if your doorway, imagine like glass doors opening up into a backyard, that could be quite a bit wider than 4 cubits, so he gets the full width of that doorway. A Maimar says a pit for holding animal food, known as a pera de souffle, has 4 cubits on each and every side, so that there will be sufficient space for the animals to stand. And the Gemara adds, and we said this only when the pit has no special entrance to reach it, but rather is accessed from all 4 sides. Now we're on page 11b. But if he designates an entrance leading to this pit and does not approach it from all sides, then he has only 4 cubits in front of his entrance. Again, a 4 by 4 space is considered, the property of any house, even if there are multiple houses opening into the courtyard, the 4x4 space right in front of the door belongs to the owner of that particular house. And then beyond that, in the jointly owned courtyard, they would split what's left if they're splitting it. Rav Huna says a portico, aksadra, that opens onto a courtyard does not have the adjoining 4 cubits, right? So the portico is like that space in front of an entrance. That's what a portico is. The difference is it's covered, right? That's what a portico means. It's like you've got this sort of landing area right in front of your door that opens into the courtyard. You put a little roof over it. That's your portico. Okay, so you get the whole portico if the portico happens to be more than 4x4 cubits, but you don't get another 4 cubits beyond the portico. What is the reason that 4 cubits were granted for each entrance? The 4 cubits were granted so that the owner would have room for unloading his animal of its burden. Here, he can go inside of his portico and unload the animal. Rav Sheshes raises an objection from a baraisa. Both gates of houses and gates of porticos have the adjoining 4 cubits for unloading. And the Gemara answers, when that baraisa is taught, it is specifically with regard to the portico of a study hall, which is closed and is not used for unloading burdens from animals. And the Gemara expresses surprise at this answer. It is obvious that this is the law governing the portico of a study hall, as it is a proper room. It's part of the house. Rather, the Baraisa is referring to a Roman portico, which is more open than the portico of a study hall, but also not used for unloading, right? So at what point do we transition from just a covered area that's really outside the house to a kind of screened-in porch, a porch with a roof where they keep some, a couple of couches and a coffee table, right? And then that becomes like an extension of the house, and you wouldn't bring your animals in there to unload, so you need an additional 4 cubits beyond that. But sometimes it's just a roofed area, but it really is like the outside, and you would bring your animal in there to unload it, and then you wouldn't need the additional 4 cubits. The sages taught in a baraisa a gatehouse, a portico, and a balcony with a staircase leading down to the courtyard have the adjoining 4 cubits for unloading. Even if 5 houses open onto the balcony, they only have 4 cubits in front of the entrance to the staircase that leads to the balcony, right? So there's there's condos. So there's people who live on the 2nd floor. They have a balcony that connects their houses. This is very common. This is like apartment buildings all over LA. I'm sure all over the country, right? So a little apartment building where on the 2nd floor, they have kind of a walkway in front of the doorways of the houses, which you could think of as a balcony. How do you get to the 1st floor, to the courtyard, down a staircase? So that staircase serves 5 dwellings on the 2nd floor. So are we going to say that down at the bottom by the staircase where it opens into the courtyard, that since there's 5 residents on the 2nd floor, that they should have 5 times the 4x4 cubit landing area in front of the staircase? No, because the 4x4 cubit landing area in front of the staircase where you would bring the animals to unload, you'd only need that near the staircase because that's where you would take stuff and walk up the stairs. So you don't multiply it just because there's more residents on the 2nd floor. Rabbi Yochanan asked Rabbi Yanai, does a chicken coop that also has a staircase have 4 cubits or does it not have 4 cubits? And Rabbi Yanai said to him, what is the reason that 4 cubits are granted? It is so that the owner will have room for unloading the burden of his animal. Here, this space is not needed as the chickens climb up to get to the coop and climb down to get out by themselves. No additional space is required for the owner to stand alongside them. Rava asked Rav Nachman if a house is half roofed and half unroofed, right? Half roofed, half unroofed. Does it have the adjoining 4 cubits or does it not have the 4 cubits? Rav Nachman said to him, it does not have the 4 cubits. And the Gemara comments, it is not necessary to state this law when the house's roofing is over the inside portion of the house, since it is possible for the owner to go inside and unload his animal. Rather, even when the house's roofing is over the outside portion of the house, it is not given 4 cubits, as even in such a case, it is possible for the owner to go inside and unload his animal there. He's got some kind of a circular driveway that reaches into a courtyard, like a private courtyard of his house. That's where he unloads his animal. He doesn't need this additional 4 cubits. Rav Huna asked Rabbi Ami, if one of the residents of an alleyway onto which several courtyards open, wishes to alter his entrance to a different alleyway, i.e., to make an entrance to his courtyard that will open onto a different alleyway, can the residents of that second alleyway prevent him from opening this entrance, or can they not prevent him from doing so? And Rabbi Ami said to him, the residents of that second alleyway can prevent him from making the change. And Rav Huna further asks, when a king, in other words, somebody who has an access to his house, wanted to create a new access into another alleyway that was owned by people, and when he adds his entranceway, that's going to affect the traffic, affect the joint ownership, it's going to impose on those other people. Now, he could get them to agree to allow him to open his house to create an entranceway into that other alleyway where he doesn't currently have access, but he can't just force his way into that alleyway. It's not his property. He doesn't have that right. Rav Huna further asked, when a king issues a beletting order to the residents of a courtyard, right? The king's going to say, my soldiers are going to stay in your houses. You don't like it? Tough. Obligating them to house his soldiers in their homes, is the burden divided according to the number of people in each household? Or is it divided according to the number of entrances that each house has opening into the courtyard? So Rabbi Ami said to him, it is divided according to the number of people in each household. Presumably, how many soldiers will these houses hold? As many people as the houses can hold. So the Gemara comments, that opinion is also taught in a Baraisa. The dung in a courtyard, which the residents wish to use, is divided among them according to the number of entrances that open into the courtyard, whereas the beletting of soldiers is divided according to the number of people in each household. Now, there is something a little bit strange about that. If you think about it, imagine that you've got a neighborhood where, let's say, you have one house with a huge family in it, multiple generations, they all like living together, the kids couldn't, get a job going on their own. So there's, grandparents, parents, kids, and even, little ones of the grandkids. There's 11 people living in that house, let's say a 4-bedroom house, 11 people. And then just a couple houses up the street, there's a retired couple whose children have moved away. They have a house the same size and only 2 people live there. So according to this, when the king sends his soldiers into the neighborhood and says, you will billet my soldiers, so the house with 11 people is going to put up 11 soldiers and the house with 2 people is going to put up 2 soldiers? Shouldn't it almost be the opposite? Maybe it is the opposite. Maybe when they say according to the number of people who are living there, what they mean is inversely, right? I'm not sure. Let's see. According to the people. Some suggest that this is referring to the relative wealth of the residents, i.e. the wealthier the residents or the larger their house, the greater the number of soldiers they must billet, right? So somebody asked the same question I did and came up with the same suggestion, but it's not clear that that's what the Gemara meant. Okay, let's keep going. Rav Huna says, if one of the residents of an alleyway wishes to close off an area adjacent to his entrance, i.e. to build a structure in the alleyway adjacent to the entrance of his courtyard, like he's going to build a little portico in front of his entrance that's going to extend into the alleyway, which is a shared alleyway, is like a courtyard. Can he do that? Now, it's an alleyway. It's not a courtyard. But nevertheless, like all these other residents whose houses open into that alleyway, they have kind of this unfettered access moving down the alleyway so that, they needed to bring a moving wagon in there, they could. Now, if this guy builds his portico into that alleyway, he's going to block off some of that passage, and maybe some wide loads that could have passed there before can't pass there now. So that would be an imposition on his neighbors. Can he do that? The residents of the alleyway can prevent him from building such a portico, and this is because it will increase the way for them. Since they will have to circumvent the structure when going to and from their homes, they can object and prevent him from building it. They could agree, maybe they would demand being paid for giving up this portion of their joint alleyway, but he can't force the building of that portico without their consent. Now the Gemara raised an objection from a Baraisa. If 5 courtyards open onto an alleyway, all the residents of the alleyway may use that part of the alleyway that faces the entrance to the outermost courtyard, and the residents of the outermost courtyard may use only that part of the alleyway adjacent to its own entrance. And similarly, the residents of the other courtyards may use that part of the alleyway that faces the second courtyard, i.e. the one next to the outermost courtyard, and the residents of the second courtyard may use that part of the alleyway adjacent to its own entrance, and they may use that part of the alleyway facing the outermost courtyard. In other words, who gets access to what, right? What are the rules? What's the limitations? How much can you expect to use in that joint alleyway? And that Baraisa continues, the outcome is that the residents of the innermost courtyard, right? It's like a dead-end alleyway. So the innermost courtyard, right, is the one that you have to walk all the way down the alleyway to get it, past everybody else's entrance. So the outcome is that the residents of the innermost courtyard may use that part of the alleyway adjacent to its own entrance, and they may use that part of the alleyway facing each and every other courtyard as well. Since they walk past it, they have the right to use it. According to this analysis, it should be permitted for the owner of the innermost courtyard to close off the area in front of his courtyard, since he is the only one who has permission to use it. Nobody needs to walk past his part of the alleyway since he lives at the end of the alleyway. No one needs to walk past his doorway. So if he's the only one that has access to that part of the alleyway, can he close it off, is what's being asked. And the Gemara answers, this is a dispute between Tanaim, the sages of the Mishna, as it is taught in a Baraisa. If one of the residents of an alleyway wishes to alter his entrance to a different alleyway, the residents of the other alleyway can prevent him from doing so. And if there had been an entrance there beforehand, which is now sealed, and he wishes to open it, then the residents of that second alleyway cannot prevent him from doing so. This is the statement of Rebbe. And Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, if there are 5 courtyards which open onto an alleyway, the residents of all of the courtyards may use the alleyway with each other. In other words, all the entrances, all the houses that open into this alleyway have equal access to all of the alleyway, since an alleyway in that sense is like a courtyard. It's not just a path for walking, it's a place that they might use. Maybe they're going to have a little street party. So anyone whose residence opens into that alleyway has full access to the whole alleyway. There's none of this business that the guy at the end of the alley, only he can use that part of the alley. And the Gemara expresses surprise about this last ruling. Courtyards? Who mentioned anything about courtyards? Why are they mentioned, considering that the Baraisa is discussing the laws of courtyard? Is not discussing the laws of courtyards, but rather alleyways. And the Gemara answers, the Baraisa is incomplete, and this is what it is teaching. Additionally, if there are 5 courtyards which open onto an alleyway, the residents of all the courtyards may use all of the area facing the outermost courtyard, and the residents of the outermost one may use only the area facing their own entrance. So they don't get the full use of the alleyway. This is the statement of Rebbe, but Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says if there are 5 courtyards which open onto an alleyway, the residents of all of the courtyards may use all of the alleyway. And the Gemara directs the discussion to the details mentioned in the Baraisa. The master said if there had been an entrance there before that is now sealed and he wishes to open it, right? So let's say somebody has a residence that has, a front entrance onto an alley and a rear entrance onto a different alley. And at some point in history, maybe before he lived there, they sealed off the rear entrance. They didn't, they had a security problem. They didn't want anyone in that rear alley having access to the house. So they sealed off that door and they just got it in and out of the house through the front alley. But that entrance to that rear alley did exist at one time. So according to this ruling, you can't just open an entrance onto an alleyway without the permission of the members of that alley. But if your house did once have that such an entrance and it was sealed up at some point, then you don't need permission to unseal it. Rava says this was taught only when he did not break its doorposts, i.e. when the doorpost remained intact after the entrance was sealed. But if, when they sealed the entrance, they broke the doorposts, thereby demonstrating that the entrance had been completely negated, then the residents of the other alleyway can prevent them from opening a new entrance into their alleyway. Abaye said to Rava, a Baraisa is taught which supports your opinion. Now we're on page 12a. I'm almost done. I'm very close to done. So if you've got questions or comments, please get them in now. A house that has a sealed entrance still has the 4 cubits adjoining that entrance because the entrance can be reopened. If one broke its doorposts and sealed the entrance is completely negated and it does not have the 4 cubits adjoining it, nor the right to enter a new alleyway. Where it was sealed off from it. When they broke the doorpost, they basically turned that doorway into a wall, and anyone who subsequently bought, property into that opening into that alleyway would have no reason to believe that this particular house is going to now open a door into that alleyway, because it's not like there's a sealed off door, it's become a wall. That's what I've got for us tonight. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Sunday, at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. I'm not seeing any questions that Nina's passing along. So I wish you a good vach, a good week, and a good Hodesh, a good month of Tammuz. And keep in mind, we'll post something that Tuesday is Gimel Tammuz, which is the yard site, the commemoration of the passing away of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who had such a vast and tremendous and profound impact in the Jewish world. And we just honor his contribution. Nina and I are not Chabad, but we feel very close to many Chabad rabbis and Chabadniks. And the Mesiras Nefesh, the willingness to give of themselves for the sake of the Jewish people and all people in the world by extending the mission and bringing Torah and the opportunity to do mitzvahs, out away from Crown Heights in Brooklyn and to all corners of the world. What an incredible mission the Rebbe set for his followers, and what an incredible dedication to that mission all the people of Chabad have demonstrated. And so we will in some way honor the Lubavitcher Rebbe on his yard site on Tuesday, which is Gimel Tammuz. All the best.